It is
It is
Tuesday. 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 I would say Tuesday because we are going
Yes,
to
you
have
would.
many poo references. Many poo references to follow. Welcome, and this one is I guess my one word would be unpack. If you're the type of person that is like, oh, I want to learn how to tell compelling stories that affect social change. And I want to hear from someone who does that in the most exceptional way. This is going to leave you with so many thought bites.
Yeah, this was incredible. I think this is one of our longest podcast episodes, and it was so full. We could have gone on for hours. It was incredible.
Take yourself on a long walk and have a listen to Dr. Javeria Shah. Javeria Khadija Shah.
Khadija? I think it was a
I can't do the very well. And we laughed and we talked about names and the importance of names, and we just had such a great time. We just had such a hilarious, wonderful time and learned, which is the best way to be a good human being in your soul. Learn and laugh at the same time.
This was the lightest way to talk about diversity and inclusion you could possibly ever think of. So
yeah, you could possibly imagine.
You could possibly imagine.
Enjoy. Good day. We're just having a very brief conversation about murder hornets, dusty bones, and a legless swimmer.
Aliens.
And aliens. We talked about aliens. Welcome to a very serious segment. And we're talking to two very academic people, and I'm here as well. Welcome. Dr. Javeria Shah. Can you tell me how to say your middle name?
Yeah, sure. It's Khadija.
Khadija?
Yeah. Perfect.
Khadija?
Gosh, you both got it on the first go. Yeah, Khadija.
Yay!
Oh, gosh,
Beautiful.
well done. That's amazing. Yeah. I'm not used to that. That's why it's a K.
I've had such an amazing time getting to know you, and also I love your appreciation of my poo emojis that I send on WhatsApp to you. Everyone who knows me on WhatsApp knows me for my poo emojis. I mean, they're not my poos, they're someone else's. This sounds worse. Let's reverse the poo. Also sounds terrible. But these poo emojis have been my lifeline to other human beings over the course of the pandemic. And I said to people that I would not relinquish the poos because when we had the toilet paper shortage, I was scarred. I think many people were scarred. I did what many people would do and looked at my wardrobe and said, what could go? What could I use if I need to? What item of clothing?
And what was it?
It was probably what I'm wearing now.
Is what you would wipe poo with?
I would choose this over, because this is like cheapy pajamas.
But it's what you would use. It's not what you use, wash and then put back on.
This has a good ending to the story. It's yes, that was purely hypothetical and remains so. The stain doesn't mean anything anyway, but I digress. Javeria and I have had the best time getting to know each other. A mutual friend of ours is working on a documentary, and it has its UK premiere coming up very soon. It's called My Name Is, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I immediately, within about the first 20 seconds of meeting Javeria, I knew that I wanted you to be on this show with us, Javeria is a cultural sociologist and interdisciplinary scholar with expertise in policy, media education, sociology, and the visual arts. She specializes in person-centered research that interrogates and re-conceptualises societal positionings of the individual and their self-identity formation. And her current research is strongly focused on the conceptualization of socialization as social performance. Did you all get that?
I didn't.
Javeria, do you prefer Dr. Javeria or do you prefer Javeria?
Javeria would be really lovely. Thank you. Just because I also feel very connected to you, Christina, and Dr. Javeria feels a bit formal. So
Right. Yes.
Javeria is good.
It is quite formal. However, I'll just say it if I'm angry with you. If you haven't responded to a poo emoji that I have sent.
Dr. Javeria.
Dr. Javeria.
Javeria, respond to my poo.
P.S.
Right
I
now.
just took screenshots of some of the poo emojis I get from Christina. And when we air this episode,
Right.
I will share some of those on our story. So
Do them
y'all
with,
can
see. Do them like on a reel with like a little really happy music. Like happy poo, happy boo boo boo.
I just love it.
yes.
I just love the just like fostering the power of the poo during a pandemic. Lots of peas there, lots of effectiveness there. It's great.
Oh, amazing. So, Javeria, actually tell us in non-academic terms the best way that you can what you do, because you do so much and we don't have all the time in the world. But tell us what, in your words, layman's terms, like so I can understand.
Yeah, no. This is actually really nice because it's nice to talk about our work like a normal human being. I think sometimes you're under so much pressure to try and you perform that sort of academic identity, and that's lots of big words that often don't need to be used, to be honest. Don't tell
I just said this.
Don't tell the community I said that. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Raquel. I agree with you. Essentially, I am interested in human experience. I think that quite often we talk about things in a really sort of general way or an abstract way or a clinical way. It's like detached from like the person, the lived experience. So I'm very much interested in really exploring that, but also looking at the differences in the lived experience. So if you're racialized as not white, it will be a very different type of experience that you have in society. If you're a woman, it's a very gendered experience in society. So it's looking at it through all those different perspectives, and it just helps to know that there's voice being brought into that. So I'm going to end with my favorite quote, just to summarize what I do, which is, statistics are the tears wiped off human beings. And I think that's really powerful, and that's kind of what spurs me on to keep trying to get that human experience and that individual voice into my work.
That's beautiful. So do you kind of mix methods? Do you do qualitative and quantitative work, or do you actually stick more into quantitative? Like, what are you primarily doing?
I'm purely qualitative. So
Wow.
I don't do any quant at all.
Yeah,
because I just feel like it can become, this is
you
my,
lose
I'm
the
not,
story.
I feel that, yeah. I feel you lose the story. And I think the stories are so important in giving us those insights into people's like, just really like unique and beautiful and nuanced sort of existences, like what inspires them, what ticks them off, what makes them passionate, what experiences have they had. And so I'm really just interested in drawing that out. So loads of sort of interviews, that's a technique I use. I like to use video.
Can I ask, can you explain to me, because we're big Brené Brown fans, can you explain to me your understanding of grounded theory? I love the idea of it, but I can never explain this.
So there's actually two versions of it, or like two takes on it, because the people that came up with it kind of they split off into different directions and took grounded theory in a different direction each. So the one that I am aligned with is it's known as the Straussian grounded theory. So the idea is that let's take lived experience, right? So I don't want to come at that type of research with my own assumptions. And if I bring my own theories into it, then that is a form of assumption. If I'm saying, oh, based on feminist thought or based on, I don't know, Marxist thought or whatever, this is what the person's experience will probably be. I'm actually not doing that person a disservice because I'm not really allowing them to just share their experience and then listen to understand and make sense. So with grounded theory, what I'm able to do is really engage, listen to those experiences without any like adding my own like biases or my own perspectives, and then I generate the theory. So I use the experiences to help me then figure out what that could be speaking to from a theory perspective. So I don't know if I've explained that right, and I'm sure there's
Yeah.
loads of hardcore academics out there who'll probably be like thinking, God, what is she doing?
They're going to send you a poo emoji, the grey poo
Oh God!
lying on its
As long
side.
as it's just, as long as it's just an emoji, Christina, and not the real thing, I'm fine.
That would be awful. I'd be like, okay, academics are brutal.
Exactly.
Academics can be brutal. P.S.
can.
They really
They
can.
can.
This is like a really intense area to work in.
Yes, it is.
I mean, Raquel is doing what is your master's technically? Is it in persuasive communications or is it something even more specific? Raquel?
So it's a Master of Science in Persuasive Communications, but I focus on a couple things: health communications and then the digital world. So persuasive technologies, things like that. But
So fellow academics, but I have a sidebar because so many of our listeners, they talk about being so active, and we talk about being really proactive and just getting out there and fail brilliantly, be brave, live full, go for it. And academia is like the opposite of that. It's like wait there, research, read things, do stuff. And I think the reality is one of my favorite things about the way that Raquel and I work and the things that we do is that we just love to glamorize this nerdiness and this side of being academic, and actually really highlighting how important that is to, depending on the context, take a step back and actually research and do your work. When people look at going into careers, how did you decide that academia was going to be that which nurtures you the most? Why?
Wait.
That was the end of the question.
no, first I want to know how you grew up. I want to know,
fine.
like, take us back.
Okay,
take
well,
us
you
back
remember
before
that.
you're jumping up like
I know,
years, honey.
but it was
Okay.
a sidebar. I sidebarred into it. You remember that question?
There is
then?
no chronological order here.
No.
I got the question. Okay, tell us
Okay.
how you grew up. Give us the minutia.
Yes.
Like, where did you live? How did you grow up? Get detailed, and then let's talk about how that merged into what you do.
Fine.
Okay, so I'm gonna do like the wavy thing because I'm flashbacking now. I'm like,
Yes.
right. So I am what I describe. I describe myself as a post-colonial Londoner, which means that I was born in London, but I have family who were from places that were part of the British Empire. So they were technically regarded as British subjects back in the day. So, yep, East London is my home, born and bred. And it's really strange because I'm not usually a nationalistic kind of person. I'm not like patriotic or anything, but I think I am a little bit when it comes to like that London identity, particularly the East London one. I'm very proud of being an East Londoner. So I had such very humble beginnings, grew up in a really hard-working, working-class family. My dad was, or is rather still, a first-generation immigrant, and he came over in 1963 to study his bar exam. But it didn't work out. He got into all sorts of other different weird and wonderful things, and stayed. And so I growing up, it was very much like being part of the kind of British colonial diaspora, then also being part of like there was like the whole East London working class intersection. And then I grew up in a Shia Muslim family, And obviously they're a minority within like the Islamic world, so that was another aspect to it. So it was just like a really interesting mix of lots of exposures and experiences, and just trying to sort of mishmash them and make sense of myself, really. Like, who am I and where do I belong?
And what was East London like for people who've never been to the UK?
Okay. I should say, as a disclaimer, it's very different now. It's like, it's quite posh now. It wasn't that posh before. So where I grew up, which was sort of like, there's a borough of Waltham Forest, so Leytonstone, Leighton. Sorry, my Cockney accent does slip up sometimes. So Leighton, innit? So Leighton, Leytonstone, Walthamstow. And those areas at the time, sort of like, we're looking at the 80s and the 90s, were really rough.
So rough.
Really rough. Really, really rough. Like, you had parts of those areas which were actually, I would say, dangerous. You know, you didn't feel safe. Like, there was criminality, and you had to be really sort of really self-aware and really on your guard. And I remember sort of having like physical fights in school, like right up to high, like what I guess would be high school for you guys. It was just really full on. But I guess now that I look back on it, it sort of toughened me up, I think. So
yeah, this is why you're just gonna have one of those aviary, what is the bee thing where you like harvest murder hornets and be like, I got you now. I find you now. We keep talking about where these murder hornets have gone. I want to know.
I'm still intrigued.
This is going to be looked up. Like, Javeria is going to come back to you tomorrow, and you're gonna have literally like studies sent to you that you can read about where the hornets went.
This is why they prefer not to be called the murder hornets. They like to be called the grievous bodily harm hornets.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's hilarious.
So this is where you grew up, and then you went to school. Like I'm assuming, obviously, you went to post-secondary school at some point. Where did you go to post-secondary school? Did you stay in the UK? And how did you find your niche that you're in now?
That's a really good question. So I've always stayed in the UK in terms of my study. Like, my higher education's always been in the UK. But I guess my niche from quite a young age was film. And I really, so this is like an insight. You know, you were saying you were glamorizing geekdom. Like, let's see what you can do with this geekdom I'm about to share with you. So I caught a Brando film, a Marlon Brando film on TV when I was about 10, 11 years old. In those days, you just had terrestrial television, and it was all scheduled, and you'd just catch the old black and white film now and again. I think it was on the waterfront. And I was completely like bowled over, completely inspired. I thought, wow, like, I found the performance amazing. And I just got, I guess those were the beginnings of me as an academic. I started researching him, but a bit like a psycho, you know, because they didn't have... they didn't have the internet or anything, obviously, so I'm just like going into libraries like Brando, you know, trying to find stuff. It was
oh my god, you had to watch this YouTube. Just, how did you go into libraries? Brando, just Brando.
Find him. I was like this weird, this like weird obsession. And it wasn't even like cool vintage at that time, because it was like the 90s.
It was the night. There's just one person.
Just one person. Brando. It's like late 80s, early 90s. Like, you know, you've got Tupac, you've got Nirvana emerging, but no, I'm a late bloomer. I'm like Brando. So I did that for a while, and then I got into the like De Niro and The Godfather and all that sort of thing. So,
well, those are more cool. So
yeah, that was really cool, really cool. Imagine the little girl, you know, with like a perm and NHS glasses, you know, like slaving away at the books, just like, gotta find more information.
love about that though? You are you. You are you.
Oh
You
my
are always you.
Just owning it.
That's true. No doubt. I've definitely always been me. Like it or lump it, a bit of Marmite, I think. You know,
Now
you
you've just
love it or lump
glamorized it. You have glamorized it. It's good. Okay.
Oh,
So
I
we
love
loved
it.
Brando.
Love Brando, love De Niro, got into Scorsese, got into like American sort of cinema, like mostly sort of I'd say like the post-70s, sort of mid-60s to post-70s movements. And yeah, that was my niche. Film was my passion. I loved film with a passion. I studied it at every level I could. And right up to my master's, actually, I was sticking with film and media and those sorts of disciplines. And just the fact that just the idea of bringing a story alive through a performance, or bringing a story alive through bringing like just like curating a set together with all the different components, like all of that stuff. I feel, as you can probably tell, I still feel really passionate about it. So I'm a big film buff.
Do you have like
Brando.
Did you ever think about performing? Like,
it's funny you should say that. I didn't. I don't think I had the confidence, back then. Yeah.
Whereas now,
always. Well, even now, I think it's such an art. I know. Was that good, Christine?
It was so great.
Maybe I'm
You're
onto
hired.
something. Excellent. It's going in my new show reel. Oh, I should do my De Niro actually. While I've got you guys on here, should I? Should I do my De Niro?
Go on. Yes, please.
Okay. I'm gonna do. Oh gosh, I hope De Niro never actually sees this. I'm sorry, Mr. De Niro, if you do. I love you really. So this is that famous taxi driver speech. Okay, I'm not going to do it very quickly. I'm not going to do it very long. Right. I need to turn. This is a turning moment, right? Okay. Are you talking to me? That was quite good. Please tell me that'll be edited out.
It's the best thing.
Absolutely not. I just made this whole podcast. Literally, anyone listening to this, you have to take a moment at some point in your day, and you have to go to the YouTube version and rewatch this, re-listen to this,
just to
with
replay.
visuals.
Just replay.
Where did diversity and inclusion and all of that come into it? Because so we're obsessed with media. We love media. You can't get enough of it. You're doing it up until your master's.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
What happens, and this is a bit sad now, I guess a bit sad.
Okay.
I think what happens is I was sort of straddling the media industry whilst studying, and it was always like internships and things, so still quite light touch. And then I start getting into the serious media gigs as I'm sort of embarking on the masters and then finishing that. And if I'm honest, I just realized how racist it was. Like the industry was so racist and so misogynistic. I just didn't see myself reflected back in it. I didn't see myself respected in it, or heard. And so even though it'd been like this lifelong passion, I think it was really difficult to realize that I'd idealized it somewhat and thought it's like the movies, like working on the movies is like the movies. And it was a really horrible wake-up call to realize in my early 20s, actually, I've invested all of this into something which I probably won't be able to see through because it's just too toxic. So I also had a passion for sort of, I guess, making a difference, for the lack of a better way of putting it, really. Like I used to do, I've always done work with like homeless charities, and I've always volunteered all over the board, like all over the place. Like I did mentoring like youth offenders and things like that. And that was quite often using like the media skills as a catalyst to reach those groups. So you might entertain homeless through like a film night, to get their mind off Christmas, or you might, train some youth offenders through their own little mini film project, which they get to see on the big screen at the local cinema. So those sorts of encounters were really beginning to make an impact on me and inspire me. And so I decided to leave the media industry and go into education. And that's where this whole thing started.
It's so interesting that you're saying that for a couple reasons. One, I think it's a really interesting step to go into academia to kind of end up combating what you were seeing in like the real careers in media. The other side of it is, I mean, it's sad to say, but the power of immersion and the power of narrative. So coming from a communication science standpoint, that is one of our strongest tools. So being able to have that media background and to really like start shaping and making differences, your combination of experience is the perfect combination to start making those changes. Did you know that, or did you just kind of do it because this is what interested you and then it came out flowers?
I think the latter, but not quite flowers though. I mean, what's tough about it though, like what's tough, Raquel, is that you're someone always, like, you want change, right? But someone has to say it first. Someone has to try and push it first. And if you're that person doing it first, that comes with a lot of it can come with a lot of toxicity that you experience from like others who see you as a threat or see you as dismantling the status quo. They don't like it, or those resistances and those interactions. I mean, all of those, they affect your well-being. Like, you have to have a really good and balanced well-being plan in place to keep yourself together. So it is still really, really hard.
Well, I have to say,
will be.
You have found a good community of people who have now officially got your back and will send you these poo emojis at any time that you would like. But I love that you say that, because the reality is so many of our guests and so many of our audience members feel exactly the same. And I love that you two articulated this so well. Feeling like you have to overcome the barriers to entry at different levels and then take on the emotional workload of doing that yourself and protecting yourself along the way can be extraordinarily mentally challenging and physically and emotionally challenging. And I think that's, I was having a conversation with Carolyn Quinn yesterday. I went for happy hour with Carolyn, she's now a vocalogist. And she was one of our guests on the podcast. And she said, how do you do these things? How do you deal with this? How's your mental health? How do you, we talked about burnout. We talked about so many of these things because we're working to impact such positive social change, but against a system that so much that we have to learn how to navigate and communicate at the same time as leaping over these barriers, right? And so having fire friends and people around you in a community of people, which is why I often say to people, like, just listen to the podcast, like subscribe to the YouTube channel and listen to the little bits and pieces that make sense for you. It's so important to have a like-minded group of people around you and surround yourself with that. But that said, what do you do to, like, individually, how do you protect your well-being?
That's a really good question. I don't really have an answer right now. It kind of changes all the time, if I'm honest. I like to change it up a little bit. I'm a really big fan of meditation. I particularly like the 6-stage meditation. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of that wonderful meditation. I will send you a link. If it's helpful for your listeners. So I'm really a big fan of meditation, but I think also just allowing yourself moments to just sit still or not do anything without feeling like you have to fill up every hour or every moment. So weekends are really precious for me, and I try really hard to sort of ring fence those away from work and things and just keep them for myself and friends and family, and just enjoy being human, just have those human experiences. I think sometimes we don't realize we become these vessels, like these robots who just going through one routine and one schedule to another, and it's like, well, where's the life coming into all of this, you know? So yeah, it varies, but I'm a big fan of just making time. I think is essentially the formula for me.
That's a great reminder.
Make that time.
I do worry, Christina, because you do. From all the time I've known you, you are just on it. You're so amazing and so on it. And I do, yeah. So I'm glad it's a reminder. So when you take those moments out, you know, just don't forget. Obviously, you've got to ping across a poo, but then generally, like, you know, make time for self as well.
Ping across a poo and then have a little nap. You know, I do love that reminder, because for acting, for me, and I appreciate that, you know, you and I are very similarly busy, and same with Raquel. Like, we fill up the hours of the day in minutes, you know, a minute at a time. But I carve out my Sundays. So I work 6.5 days a week. And then I carve out my Saturday evening and Sundays. And the last couple, I couldn't, because I was on set or doing something that required me to be there on a Sunday. And actually, I could feel so heavily the difference. Just my mental clarity was affected. And I think I love that you said it's really important to constantly shift your parameters of what it feels like to actually have downtime, and to have basically like a toolkit of downtime tools, where some days you're like, I only have 10 minutes. This is how I very quickly I'm going to give myself some meditation or put something in place. But understanding that whenever you are pushing towards a positive social impact or any kind of impact, project-based work has an end. And if it doesn't, you have to give it one, because otherwise you will just keep going in perpetuity and you never see the end. And that causes a lot of, for me, anxiety and that panic to start rising, because I say, well, I don't know when this is going to stop. And I'm very grateful to Larry, my career coach, who I see every week, who will constantly remind me, okay, this is where we're at right now. You can afford to keep pushing a little bit further. How do you feel about this? Where are you sitting at? What's your downtime looking like? So I think that's a really great takeaway for everyone listening. Someone, and Carolyn actually said to me, she was like, when I would build in to walk to certain places and listen to the Bombshell Brunches podcast and have those like-minded people in my ear being like, yep, it's okay to be panicking right now. It's okay to be, you know, but remember to meditate.
Yeah. Oh,
I want to know, how do you deal with encountering resistance? Because that is something that all of us in this Zoom room have experienced, whether it's in a conference, in, you know, the boardroom, if it's, I mean, you're putting out papers. And one, I would love to know examples of your work that is encountering resistance, and then how are you dealing with that? And how are you, I don't know if you do this or not, but do you adjust your message to reduce resistance?
Oh gosh, that's a really, really good question, because it's so loaded. Oh wow. I'm gonna have a little think of that. So first, I'm gonna start reverse to back. So no, I don't filter down or dilute or anything to suit like the resistance or to adapt to the resistance, because I think the nature of the work that I do is it's meant to be uncomfortable, and the resistance is a representation of the work that needs to be done on those communities or those people need to do on themselves. And so it's almost like a measure that it's working, if that makes sense. If it was just comfortable and easily received, I'd be more worried because it would probably say say less about my work, I think. I put out some really challenging content around whiteness as an ideological positionality, and how that's can be quite insidiously enacted by everybody, regardless of their racializations, to be upheld as a form, as a normative. So in plain English, essentially, we don't choose the bodies that we're born in, but they do bring us different types of privileges. Whether it's like, if we're non-disabled, we have a privilege there in an ableist society. If we're male, we have a privilege there in a society that clearly favors men. So I think similarly, when we're looking at race, it's recognizing that there are privileges attached to particular racial groups. And so having those conversations through and talking, using terms like whiteness, I think can sometimes be really uncomfortable for people, because they think you're being very literal. They think you're literally talking about white people. And then it's like trying to unpack that and explain, well, actually, I'm not talking about any individuals here. I'm talking about a system and a structure that's been set up, which makes one group the norm, and the other groups, well, literally the othered. That's where the term comes from. So, you know, and so that those can be difficult conversations. I think around colonization can be difficult. I think sometimes, like in Britain, we haven't done enough work on ourselves as a nation state to really unpack our relationship with our former colonies and what that meant and what those relationships were. So I think when it's brought up very openly and transparently, like, I think a lot of people who aren't used to hearing about it feel really uncomfortable, because they feel like they're being attacked, and they feel like their patriotism is somehow like being tested, and they have to prove how patriotic they are for England. And so those can be tough conversations, because again, they're not recognizing that I'm also British because I'm brown. It's almost like, you know, there's a particular brand of British which is always white or English, and so it's almost like I don't have a right to have those conversations or to make those criticisms or to raise those things. So it's just really, really, really challenging. And I think pretty much all my work in different capacities has that kind of resistance.
So
I can't think of anything that doesn't.
How do you bypass that? So because Christine and I talk about this quite a bit, and I come from, obviously, we just said persuasive communications world. So my brain is always working on, how can we get people to listen? How can we get people to digest this? How can we get, I mean, it depends on what the outcome is, but how can we increase knowledge? And everybody will have their different resistance to a whole slew of things, whether it's in health or diversity or you name it. So I guess when you're encountering this, and quite frankly, it's not your job to have people understand the content, but you're doing this because you're passionate about it. So I guess I'm trying to figure out if there's ways that you found that can help in certain times to bypass that resistance, or certain key things that you can say or develop in your communication that can kind of cut through that and start opening up people to having those conversations, or do they remain quite resistant?
I think a little bit of both. I think the way I put out my academic outputs is very accessible. I use video, I use conversation, I use
amazing.
Yeah, like lots of different ways and methods. I'm very much against the whole publish or perish model. I feel that's really toxic. Yeah. So a lot of it sits under the Social Performance Network, which I set up in 2018. And we released a podcast series last year, which is called Off Script. And a lot of the times these are like sort of, I guess, like stealthy platforms through which we can get the word out to a wider audience, and they'll be more receptive to the ideas because it's, you know, it's accessible.
I love stealthy platforms. So this is like, again,
yeah,
it's your Brando.
This is so
Right.
important, though. Like, this is what we are talking about right now. I mean, with all kind of studies, science, you name it. The thing is, and this is what one of my professors says that just makes me laugh. She goes, I'm sorry to all of the PhD students. Nobody is going to read your paper. Like, I will read your paper, and maybe your classmates will be nice enough to read your paper. And perhaps if you have a really nice parent, they might read your paper. But otherwise, don't expect any. I know it's your baby. I know you slaved away at it. Nobody's going to read it. So that means you have to come out with that content in different ways, which is exactly what you're talking about. And it's brilliant. So I love this. So you have a podcast, you have different media going on, you have videos, and you're pushing the content in easy to digest ways that aren't full of. I was just talking to Christina before this episode, and I was like, studies are crazy. They'll use a word and then they'll say, but in this study, it means something completely different than the known way that people actually know this meaning. They'll say the word there, just all of a sudden in this study doesn't mean there anymore. It means far. And then you have to remember throughout the whole study that there doesn't actually mean there, it means far. But you make this easy to digest.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think I see, I guess it's the working class in me. I see it as exclusionary. I feel like it's like a privilege to be able to be in those spaces, speak the way they do. And then I think that it's used as a way of excluding people. So there might be some there might be some really valid ideas and opinions and practice going on, but because it's not being packaged in this really restrictive way of like academic writing, it's just excluding that what could be a really groundbreaking way of approaching that discipline. So,
and it's expensive. Like, to actually get journal articles and to gain access to these things, they are hundreds of dollars. Like, this is not cheap to access this information. So I can't agree with you more.
I feel like that in and of itself is such a classist, it's such an authoritarian, like classist colonial system, because it's like, okay, well, you need to pay for the privilege of us having the privilege of having enough time to write academically in the form that we want to, that our forefathers have done, because forget about the mothers, we just say forefathers, and you can pay us hundreds of dollars for the luxury of you having to pull your eyeballs out of your face because you spent the first 2 hours in your hard-earned $300 in trying to understand the different definitions
of their being far.
Of their being far.
Well, exactly that. And from my perspective, because I see myself as more of a scholarly activist than an academic, like a strict traditional academic. So I want the work to help change. I want the work to help make some people's lives better. All people would be great, but we know that everybody's got a different idea of what would be better. So obviously, don't want to be going around making like white supremacists' life better, because that would just be weird. So it's like, that's why I'm just being cautious here. So
you'd be like, you didn't read the definitions, did you? I'm going to release the murder hornets. By murder hornets, I actually mean strong words that I use willy-nilly.
And as I walk away, I'll turn around and I'll be like, expect the poo!
Are you talking to me? Oh my gosh, there's so many ways we can go with this. One of my favorite quotes is actually Toni Cade, who is an amazing artist here in Vancouver and an activist, an artivist, if you will. She actually mentioned it on they mentioned it on a David Suzuki Foundation snippet, and they said, this is a quote from Toni Cade Bambara. I hope I said that right. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think one of my favorite, I love that quote so much.
I love that too.
And I just really wanted to honor Tonya for being the first person, you know, they highlighted it to me. And one of the things that I love, and when we talk about careers in entertainment, and obviously you're on the side of this as well, Javeria, where it's like, this storytelling is the best way to give people the most amount of freedom of choice to change their mind if it so inspires them. But it doesn't.
And empathy.
And empathy, right? But it doesn't utilize what I consider to be hugely patriarchal systems, and again, like, I'm talking about the systems, not the people, or I love that you highlighted that earlier, but you know, that allows us to give other people the choice to change, which doesn't subscribe to be telling people to change. And I often tell this story when I have clients, or I'm talking on a panel about why I do what I do. I studied politics, I studied law as part of my business degree, and I was told that this would be a really appropriate way for me to go and impact humanity. But the problem was I spent most of my time feeling like I was in argument mode and trying to force people to change, forcing with legislation, forcing with lobbying. And I have the greatest respect for amazing lawyers and politicians, but it didn't sit well with me. So when I I put these all out onto a platter and said, well, how do I want to affect change? And there's really great, I studied music history at Hong Kong University for a time. And there's this really great analogy where the Greeks think that music, they used to say that music is the direct pathway to the gods. And when you think about spoken word by itself, it's powerful. But when you add music, it's almost untenable. And the combination of the two is such a powerful instrument of change that can impact change on multiple ways. And I think, you know, all three of us are sitting here as socially driven, conscious human beings that would like to impact in various ways. And entertainment and working in media, which is what you're doing, and you're helping to shape the future generations to tell stories that are inclusive, that impacts so much. Just like when you said you looked at Marlon Brando and then realized and you know, went through the first part of your life looking up to these people and then realizing that you didn't find you couldn't find you there. So affecting that change in the way that you have is so deeply impactful systemically. And I think that's incredible. And it's also incredibly difficult.
Oh, that's very humbling. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's one of those things like you guys, I imagine it's the same, isn't it? It's like when you're in it because it's the right thing, and that's what's pushing and driving you. And it's very rare to stop and take stock and think, oh, has this rippled out this way? Has this had this impact? You're just going 100 miles an hour, full steam ahead. And so it's really, it's just really sobering and really grounding and really humbling to then hear, you know, if you hear that, you know, it's had an impact or it's had a ripple. And so that can be a really lovely experience when it comes. And again, that's something I would never have gotten in the media industry. You know, I could have probably helped tell some really meaningful stories, but based on my own embodiment and what that landscape looked like at the time, I think it would have been very much on the terms of whoever was, all the agencies that were holding the power and the privilege in terms of how stories should be told. So yeah, it is. It's really empowering. And I think stories are very empowering. You spoke about spoken word as well. So that is something I do on the side, guys.
Oh, please tell me you're a beat poet. Please tell me you do beat poetry. That's all I want, is for you to be a beat poet.
I would love to be a beat poet. I've got my black polo neck ready. I would so be ready for that.
There is
a
boo.
So ready.
It sits well on the side. Tuesdays.
I would so be ready for that.
Oh my gosh, I would so attend.
I will let you know. next time we're doing something. So it's pure improv. So the musicians and myself don't know what's going to happen. We just record at first live play. And it just seems to work somehow.
What?
It's really strange. Yeah, honestly, it just seems to
Where
work.
is this? Because I'm very close to you. I can hop, skip, and jump right over the pond.
I will definitely let you know, Raquel. You're very welcome. I'll send you a link. But it's basically, so it kind of falls under the arts activism banner, and it's definitely not about, the aesthetics or anything like that. It's very much about the message. And so the messages are usually around different social justice struggles, around sort of gender or race, and then because it's improv, don't know
but
what's
at the
going to come
same
out.
time, you're like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Don't be
Exactly.
racist.
Exactly.
I don't know.
I know, but that's the way that just shows how much our lives are informed by our own embodiments, like to a subconscious level. Like, we don't think about this because I guess we are enacting, but let's sort of break this apart. How like blooming difficult is it to be a woman? Let's be honest, in this society, in this patriarchal society, like, seriously, like, it gets to a certain point, you could just be like, it might not be a social thing. It might not even be a social thing. It might just be like, you've worked late that day. You've got to think 100 different ways of getting home safely. Yeah. And you are like on high alert, and you're like watching every, like, and you've got to be on high alert without looking like you're being paranoid or on high alert. And it's like all of these different things that you're navigating. The reason I'm sharing that example is to say that we are all subconsciously carrying our embodiments and the burdens that those struggles bring. So I think if we were to just sit back and do a stream of consciousness and just talk shit, I think it would just all come to the surface. We would just be like, woman, downtrodden, life, hard.
Beat.
I think it would be really easy.
I love that this beat poetry career is just, we get to be the first to experience it. And when Raquel and I visit London, we'll be over there. We will do a little beat poetry session, attend this improv thing of which you speak.
I'm probably just going to go mute, and then Christina's going to take over because she's amazing at that.
No,
and I will just be like...
Okay, don't set me up. Don't set me up.
I think you'll both be brilliant. You both have to do it. I insist.
Oh my god. But you know what's interesting, actually, what I love and what I absolutely adore about you is you can be so like super academic and so incredibly thoughtful, and yet have such a lightness to you, and be so ready to laugh, and be so ready to have, ridiculous conversations. How much do we, again, and I feel like I've lived in a society where I grew up watching movies with women who had shoulder pads and had to like fit into the male construct of, and people would have, like, I had this conversation yesterday with Carolyn because she's now a vocalist, and she was like, I was in there with doctors and very serious people, and she looks like a mermaid. Like, her hair is like long, shaved on the side. She's a Juno masterclass. Like, and she was like, and I was like, were you the mermaid out, like the missing mermaid? She was like, yeah, I was the contemporary participant. Everyone else were like the real doctors and stuff. And I think it's really interesting to highlight this, because as we navigate being a minority gender in a workplace that is still built for shoulder pads, and wants us to conform, the system wants us to continue being in the system because the system is what it is. It's really important to acknowledge how to dismantle that, and how to acknowledge what we're bearing, and then start to make what I love to do is daily habits, start to have add those little things where you kind of start to move away from that subscription. Do you know what I mean?
I do completely know what you mean. I think that's probably it's that type of thinking that's inspired the Social Performance Network. I'm just sick of having these this dynamic of like these different socialized identities that I feel are kind of forced on us because society hasn't done the due work in dismantling the oppression. So instead of like doing the work, they just keep recycling it by teaching every new generation that this is how you have to enact and behave. And so that's what that piece of body of work's all about. It's resisting this and challenging this that you're describing. I think we should feel empowered to be able to self-define and say, you know, this is what me being a woman means, this is what me being melanin rich means, this is what this means, this is what that means. Like in my case, for example, I hate those like acronyms. Like I think you have IPOC in Canada, maybe, I don't know.
BIPOC. We have BIPOC.
Sorry, I knew it was something OC. Yeah, I knew it wasn't Spock. I just knew it was like something. Like that's how I remembered it.
Not Spock. No.
Not Spock, but like Spock, but not Spock. OC. POC? I don't know. I've got confused again. It's here in UK, which again, it sounds like a disease you would have got in the 19th century. It's like, right? I'm a POC, you know, like, yeah, like
there's nothing humanizing about that.
Exactly. Like, who would want to be homogenized, like, without any nuance, without any like respect of the different cultural context?
The Spock.
Who wants that? Who wants to be a Spock? Apart from Spock, who's cool and does that hand thing, but who wants to be like metaphorical Spock? Nobody
wants to be metaphorical Spock.
Nobody wants to be metaphorical Spock. So I think part of my personal journey has been, I've been shedding those labels. Like there's one in the UK called BAME, which is Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. And I've shed that label because I recognize that the Black struggle is the harder racialized struggle. And so I'm an aspiring ally to the Black community. I would never like dare to try and convolute like the different racial struggles, but then also like try to convolute my experience as someone who's racialized as brown with someone who's racialized as Black, because I know that is a very different, distinctly different experience of oppression, and I'm respectful of that. And so I've shed BAME, I've shed person of color, because again, it's like, oh, so if I'm not white, then does that mean I'm colored in? Like, I don't get it. So I've started taking on labels like, I love melanin rich because it makes me feel good.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. I'm just like, yay, I'm celebrating. I save on tans. It's great.
I think that's amazing. I think it's an interesting one because I wonder how much for people who are like, I always recognize, I call us the precious few, people who have satisfied a lot of our base level foundational needs. We're on our path to self-actualization. We have, all of the, we have the food, the shelter, the opportunity to work in creative and whatever we want to in a great extent. We still have barriers, but we're not in fight or flight mode a lot of the time. And I struggle sometimes to recognize and retain sympathy for those that are in parts of the world where this education is not available to them. And so having conversations like we do is so enriching. But there's also a point where I find if we talk, when you unpack all of those things or you shed these labels, after a while, I'm like, well, where does it end? Where's this? Like, I can't wait to graduate from the constructs that we're in, but how much time can we realistically ask people to spend? And actually, I'm going to change that word. How much time can we ask people to invest in doing this? Because it is endless, it is non-stop, and it is iterative. I think having the BIPOC label, and I've said this before to people in private conversations, I'm like, I'm glad it exists and I can't wait for it to be done. But it has.
What do you mean by this? Labeling?
Yeah.
When you say this?
Yes. When I say BIPOC specifically, I've heard this same conversation where people say, I don't really like BIPOC for these reasons. And they're incredibly valid reasons. And my response is always, I agree. I can't wait for society to move past it. But sometimes we have to recognize that society isn't even there yet. So even using BIPOC or recognizing BIPOC is not, some people haven't even gotten there. So for me, I would love to go past that, but I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, go. This is your show.
Can I answer this? Can I answer this?
Yeah,
Oh my
please,
God,
please.
it's so exciting. I would say that change isn't going to happen unless we start driving it, and that's the difficult part. So this whole BIPOC thing, POC here, BAME here, if you look at it conceptually, what it's essentially doing is it's upholding whiteness as the normative, and then it's saying everybody else that isn't white can just go in this one group. It's like with cinema, right? You have French, you have German, you have Russian, you have American, you have UK, like English, but then it's like world cinema. Like, what the F is world cinema? Like seriously, dude, like give me some granular here. Like, where's the granular? Like, what?
Oh.
So
I love the way it changed that world.
World. Exactly. Like an indigenous experience is different to a Black experience, which is different to a South Asian, which is different to East Asian, which is different. Like this, it's granular, it's nuanced. It needs to be, if we really want an equitable society, and then part of that means that we have to come out of our comfort zones, dismantle those language tropes, those knowledge tropes, and reset in a way where everybody feels a sense of belonging. If I'm referenced as BAME or BIPOC or whatever, it's like I've given permission to be referenced that way, even though it doesn't feel right to me, and that's against me as a person. So that's how I look at it.
I love that, because I've always questioned labels. I've always questioned if they're giving more power or if they're taking it away. Like, that's always been a big question of mine. And I mean, part of the reason is, like, I do think sometimes it takes power away, but then also, to Christina's point, sometimes you need to band together. And I think that's what sometimes the labels are doing, is it's allowing people to band together under one flag and say, okay, let's fight this fight together. But then is it, like, how far do you take it where it's doing its job, and how far is it now, like, repressing even more? How far is it like, oh, you are the other? Because, I had this discussion about the emails with, like, him, her, and they,
Pronouns.
and pronouns, all of the many pronouns. But I wonder, I think for some people who are comfortable with themselves, this is something that might be really beneficial for them. I think for people who are not comfortable or who have faced a lot of difficulty based on their gender or based on their pronouns, that might be a really scary step. And to now feel like you have to put that on your email because a corporation has said, well, everybody in here is going to do that, that might actually be worse off and more traumatizing than having just not done it at all. I don't know, but those are the questions that come up for me. And have we done any empirical studies, or are we just asking friends, like in North America or in London, like, do you like it? Have we done studies on it? Do we know how the majority feels? Or are we just deciding that this is what should happen?
I think the way I look at it, like, there's 2 points there. So the first one about the BIPOC and the, like, bringing, like, that solidarity point.
Yeah.
I think the difference with those terms that we use now is that it's not come from the communities. It's not a grassroots, like, organic growth to language. So political Black was, for example, both in the US and the UK. I don't know about the detail of the Canadian context, but certainly in the UK and the US, there were points where you had political Black, which incorporated other ethnicities. These sorts of terms are very HRy, like very human resourcey, and they've kind of been put on people. And I think that's essentially the issue. I think with the pronouns, I mean, again, I think it's really about the collective and the individual. So do we want a society where everybody feels a sense of belonging? Or do we want a society where we're trying to please everybody? And I think those are the key terms. Like, I think like the reason we say trans rights are human rights is because they're not regarded as human rights. I mean, I don't know about the about transatlantic context, but certainly in the UK, very sadly, up until sort of like the 60s and beyond, actually, even I think even fairly recently, it was identified as a mental health issue, which is just disgusting and really, really troubling. So I think it's about those with privilege willingly giving up some of those privileges and those comforts to ensure that those that don't have the privileges have a slightly more comfortable life, like they've been enjoying all this time, and have access to opportunities. And I think, like with anything, we can't assume that we're surrounded by nice people. I know that sounds weird, but I'm just going to name it. Sometimes we just think, oh, if we educate someone, we talk about privilege, and they're going to be like, oh my God, I had no idea. Everything. It's like the last scene of Scrooge, like everything's going to be different now. Where's the turkey, right? But the truth is, there are some people who are like, I know I'm privileged. I enjoy this privilege. I'm not parting with it. Goodbye. And I think we need to own that and accept that as well in our society. Like there are people like that. I think this binary of good and bad is really unhealthy and unrealistic.
I think it's also where we're at I get really like wibbly about things, and I'm like, we're not all of us are in the same soul ascension.
Exactly.
I don't think we've been here, like, interpret this however you will, but there are people who are more open and able to deal with that for their own. And some people have had extraordinary trauma that prevents them from accessing parts of their body, their minds, their ways of thinking and being. And I think this is where I agree with what you're saying, Javeria. And I've had this conversation a lot with people about women in positions of leadership and influence. And also the she, her, they, them, the pronouns, because one of the big things that I suggested was when you said it's giving up privilege, I'm not sure that I think we're giving anything up. All we're doing is honoring difference. And if someone says, I prefer they, them, that took 20 seconds of my time. And if it takes 20 seconds of my time for someone else to feel comfortable, that's what I care about. And I think, again, coming back to storytelling, that's what's so lovely, is if you have a conversation like this where people can listen and they can take what they want from this, and it inspires them to think, how do I actually feel about that? Can I see the other side? There's no pressure for any of you listening and watching right now to actually feel like you have to change, because we don't know you. We're not forcing anything. We're just highlighting and presenting our little...
I love the way you said it was. I just love the way you said that. It was all very serious and very it's great. And then you just went, and all of it was great actually. But then I love the bit where you turn around and just went, because I don't know you. So
I don't know you, guy. No.
Don't know you, so whatever.
Yeah, I'm not gonna know if you do nothing.
If you do or you don't.
I'm gonna not know.
It's true. I think the privilege point that I was raising was about how it's a privilege to not have to think about your pronouns.
Yes, you're right. Yes, I agree. I totally agree. And I think it's I think what Raquel and I love so much about bombshell brunches is that we normalize quote unquote failure, and we also normalize not being right, like so proactively now, compared to when Raquel and I first started this podcast and started working together. At the beginning, like we'd kind of dance around like, is like, if I disagreed with something, I'd be like, how do I kind of say that and not offend her? And now, well, I mean, this morning she turns around and goes, I don't agree with what you just said. I was like, okay. and I can still feel that moment inside me that wants to get defensive, that wants to or laugh or have these responses. But Raquel and I talk about it so much that I think that we are more connected. I don't want to say better. I want to say more connected human beings as a result, and more accepting of each other, because we know that we do not agree on many things, and we also highly agree on others. And the basis of the foundation, and I think this translates a lot to the work that that I see, from just knowing you a couple months, that I see you doing is you're creating a foundation for people to establish safety first and then have conversations. And
definitely.
And I'm so grateful that you do that, because when you do that in a way that people can still play and still be light and still laugh and talk about katsu curry and murder hornets, you have humanity as the foundation of a conversation. I recognize then that I can talk to you as a human being, rather than I'm here to learn about not being so racist, or I'm here to tell you about how to not be so racist, because we don't know how, we've never been anyone else.
No, we
don't know what those invisible barriers to their entry of being their best version of themselves is. So
no, you're absolutely right. We can only meet people where they are at the end of the day, and they can only meet us where we are. And I think that should really underpin any human interaction. And I also say, we have to identify, like, if we're talking about structural and systemic oppression, then we have to look at some of the behaviors as symptoms of those structures and systems. And the symptom does not make the human being. So just because there are some symptoms demonstrating, it could be misogynistic, it could be whatever, it doesn't mean that is literally what that person is. Like, they're not personifying that. There will be other aspects to that nuanced, complex individual, which are like completely polar to that and just really different. And so I think that's what I mean when I talked about humanizing. And I think, do you know what? I think a lot of it, if I'm brutally honest, I think a lot of it is underpinned by my faith. I'm a Sufi Muslim. And so I believe very much in, like, that we're all interconnected, that we're all one energy, and we have to keep our vibrations up, keep our energies up, so that we can create a better world. And
I love that.
We're all needed for that. So
I believe that too.
Yay!
I don't have the same faith, but I believe that.
Yay!
I believe that also. And if you haven't watched the Fantastic Fungi on Netflix, it is such
fungi.
It's like fantastic. Yeah, and it talks about all the interconnectedness from a nature-based level.
Like
which
fantastic or fantastic?
Fantastic. Did I sound like I said fantastic fungi?
I thought you said fantastic, and I'm like imagining a fungi with fangs.
Oh my gosh, I love that you thought that's what that was. Just these fangs.
I was like, that
just
sounds
these little,
trippy.
Like, the cutest mushrooms in the corner that are just like, yeah. Just like and then David Attenborough voice being like, every 10 years, one extra fang grows. Here's a lesser known fantastic fungi.
I think I'm going to stick to Star Trek and Spock.
Before we go, because we could just talk forever, and I love this, and I really love that we have so many things for people to have a think about. For all of you out there listening, there are so many ways that you can start to just maybe take a week, walk around, ask yourself, number one, have you the answer to the murder hornets? Most important question to answer. I don't care about the rest right now, because I trust and believe that in your due time, you will also then ask yourself, two, have I given myself enough downtime and space in my life because I am a high-powered, go-getting, ambitious, badass of a human being? And then three, what can I look at this week that maybe gives me a bit of a clue into some of the subscriptions and biases that I have towards a system that I may or may not believe in, or I may or may not think is the ultimate way to go ahead existing? I want to leave it that vague because I don't want because I don't know you, again, like we said, and I don't know what will work for you. Whether you like to read, whether you like to walk into a library and said Brando and find, like, I don't know, find some like a fantastic fungi, just like shake your hands at someone and ask for information. You do you, babeses. But before we do go, I want to talk about that granular piece and the project that is coming out and the premiere of the UK premiere of My Name Is. So can you just tell me quickly, how did you get involved, and what's the premise, and why are you so excited about it? Because it floored me when I first watched that series, and I'd love to know what you think.
Oh, well, that's lovely to hear. So I have been going through a process of decolonizing myself, which means that I have been looking very carefully at myself and the things that I enact and the things that I've uphold. So I was going by the name of Joe for 25 plus years because I realized quite early on I had a very complicated name, and it would bring up barriers, bring up issues, access to opportunities, work opportunities, all kinds of opportunities. Anyways, let's flash forward.
But wait, how did you, before you flash forward, I caught you in the middle. How did you know that? What happened? What are some of the things that happen?
Just my teacher really struggling every time, all my teachers really struggling every time my name was approaching, they were approaching my name on the register. And I used to just feel really self-conscious. I think when you're young as well, you don't want to attract like attention to yourself. You just want to sort of blend. Yeah. So it really attracts a lot of attention and make me feel really self-conscious, and just people mispronouncing it, even though they were corrected over and over again. And just making it just made me feel really, again, really just didn't make me feel like I owned the name or I liked the name. And then being mocked as well growing up, like some teachers would be like, I had one teacher that once looked at the name and just went, bloody hell, I'm not saying that out loud. And that was like,
Javeria?
Okay. Yeah. So it was just all these,
what?
Like, it was the 80s, Raquel. So yeah.
Just punch him in the shoulder pads.
Yeah. Well, it was East London, so you're looking at more like the salt and pepper kind of look, you know. Oh, baby.
Amazing. Hammer time. Hammer pants.
Hammer pants. We had the hammer pants.
Gosh.
We had the hammer pants.
And the 80s just, that
Loved
fashion.
Purple and blue.
And
yes.
Bright fluorescent pink. Love
yes.
Perms. Oh my gosh.
All of that. So and then I also noticed I applied for a few jobs with my actual name and I didn't get shortlisted, but then I applied for the same jobs so I'd sent 2 applications in. I did this a few times as a little test, and
yes,
I'd always get shortlisted with the Joe and never with the Javeria.
Of course you tested this. Of course you did. Because you're my soulmate. That's why.
Raquel I literally was like, Raquel, they're going to just fall in love and I'm going to be pushed aside like a useless poo, no longer required.
Christina, we'll have to have you on a bombshell podcast sometime.
I'll see myself out. I will see I have met the Magneto, the Xavier to my Magneto. Oh.
Yeah, I love it. So funny.
So good.
Oh gosh. So I was that's right. I was teaching a class. It was an MA class, and the filmmaker for this film was in that class as a student. And I was doing like a ice-breaking exercise and asking everybody to share their names, and it was like a really nice international community of students with lots of really beautiful international global names. And so I was making a point saying I'd like them to really tell me how to pronounce their names correctly, and I didn't mind being corrected as many times as I thought I needed to be. I wouldn't take offense, and I was apologetic in advance if I got it wrong before I'd even tried. I was just very conscious. And so I think someone raised it. They were like, why are you so conscious about this? And I explained, I said, I was originally Javeria, and just the way I was received, it just really knocked my confidence. And it also made me realize there were certain spaces I couldn't get into with that name. So I changed my name, I anglicized my name. Anyway, the filmmaker was sort of affected by that and contacted me later on in the term. And said that they were interested in exploring that a little bit more. And so we just knocked heads and came up with an idea for a research piece. And the rest, as I say, is history. We got the research funding through the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, which is part of the University of London Federation. And we have been working on this together. The filmmakers done an incredible job of the film, and that's very much their baby. And I'm sort of the principal investigator, so I've been like, I was sort of overseeing like the funding side of it, and then now it's going to go into more traditional academic outputs, and I'll be leading that side of it. But it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this. And what makes this project really special is that not only is it giving voice to stories like mine, where people had to sort of anglicize their names to fit in, but also the fact that it's a decentered research project. So there were no power dynamics here. The filmmaker and myself, student, teacher, we just worked on an equal premise together. And I think that's really special and should hopefully inspire other researchers to think similarly about working with students.
I call it facilitative leadership. And the filmmaker is Toni Cade. And the website is My Name Is Documentary, www.mynameisdocumentary.com. I would highly, it has been such a joy for me to, lend a small hand just in organizing, just doing admin-y things and just wanting to be a part of the process. Because when I watched Javeria and the other participants, subjects or participants, whichever you prefer, within this series, it really inspired, and Toni does this really well, it really inspired me on a very granular level. And it just gave me a moment in 20 minutes flat to actually step back and think, how important is it for me to get this person's name right? And I've been very lucky because my father's full name is extraordinarily Polish. And we've spent a lot of our time and a lot of our history explaining the name. I constantly have my name challenged. It doesn't fit into a lot of applications. So they're literally, even to this day on my credit card, my full name cannot fit because the credit cards are, and I've heard this before, and other, structures are built for Western names. So you typically will have like shortish names. Whereas if you have, for example, a South Asian name, a lot of South Asian names are much longer. So you can't actually fit your name, and something as simple as that others you and reminds you that you are not accepted the same way in society. And I don't necessarily think, again, that this is a personal issue. This is the system that we need to stand up with kindness, with love, with acceptance, with recognition of the privileges that we do have, and say, hey, has someone highlighted this? Is this possible to move one way or another? And some people do this with fire. Some people fight. I have a friend who's a lawyer and he fights for justice. And I am someone, and I think, Javeria, I think you're a perfect example of someone who does it academically through media as well, and inspiring countless other people to think differently, which we will never be able to measure the impact of what you do. And I will always love to watch it as it unfolds. But I'm so grateful for it. And Raquel, with your passion to help people to understand how to access things that are inherently good for their health. These are things that you do in a way that, with our own barriers, with being women in leadership and being people who have to fight to get over the barriers, I think this is a really great reminder that what we're doing is exactly what we need to be doing, and how we do it is going to differ and it's going to evolve, and we've got each other to bounce these ideas off and throw poos at.
Always. Thank you so much that was really lovely. And I hope Christina, that you're an integral part of this project as well, and we're really pleased that you to have your support. So thank you so much for being so behind it. I really appreciate it. And everybody, save the date. It's 20th of October, and it's 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. GMT, so UK time. Please do join us. It will be a Zoom screening, and those details are to follow, but save the date, 20th of October.
That's right.
We'll post about it.
We will. Yes, we'll have all of that. And if the 20th of October has passed, then just keep an eye on it. That won't be the end of the movement.
That's true.
Okay, now go and research murder hornets, my darlings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening, bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.